Okay, so today is Friday, August 28, 2020. My name's Adolpho Romero, and I'm here with Bryanna Ruiz, who will be asking questions. And we have at the other side, Attorney Kira Romero Craft, who will be answering some of the questions that we will be asking today. And we are here from the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. Thank you so much for joining us. And Kira, we would like to begin. If you would please tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your childhood, where were you born and raised, and a little bit about your own history, please.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share my oral history with you all and for the interest in our community. So my name is Kira Romero Craft. I was born in Puerto Viejo, Ecuador. I'm a middle child, and my mom was, my two sisters were born in New York City, but my mom was very much homesick, and so that's why I was born in Ecuador, and so I was a citizen of, I am still a citizen of that country, but then she returned back to New York sometime after I was born. So I was raised until probably my later teens into, I was raised in New York City. The last part of my childhood I spent in Manhattan, had the privilege of spending in Manhattan. Prior to that, we lived for a little while in New Jersey, but then mostly in Queens, New York. So I feel very privileged to have grown up in Manhattan. I had an amazing opportunities, I would say amazing opportunities every day. Due to the hard work of my parents, who emphasize education over everything. So I loved living in the city, but then, unexpectedly, my dad lost his job. And, at the time, the two choices for them, because they liked it the most, I think it felt more similar to their, environment in Ecuador, was to move to either Florida or to Puerto Rico. I had an uncle who had moved to Puerto Rico, and we had vacationed there, and they loved it. But we as kids we wanted to be around English-speaking people. I guess we revolted, and so my parents made the choice of coming to Florida. And so when I was around 16 or so, my family moved to Kissimmee, Florida initially. And that was a huge culture shock as a city kid, going to a very rural area in Kissimmee where, you didn't celebrate President's Day, but you had Rodeo Day off, was very different. And everything was different about the community and the culture in Kissimmee, Florida, as opposed to Manhattan. And I've been here ever since. I've, gone away for school. I went back to New York for a little bit. But I went to law school, college. I finished college and law school in Florida, but I did do a semester abroad. And so, I've had opportunities to travel, which I'm grateful for. But I can say now that I'm more Floridian than anything else. And very proud and happy to be so, although I will always hold New York as the place that feels like home to me.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Kira. And so what influenced you to become a lawyer, and what paths did you take to, now your role as a managing attorney at LatinoJustice?
So that's interesting because I was always a bookworm. I love to read. I did generally pretty well in school. School was never, an issue for me. And I would say, I always knew that college was my intended goal. I went to prep school when I was in New York City, but I didn't really have exactly a set, in mind that I wanted to be a lawyer. It wasn't, I think around the college age, I thought I wanted to become a mechanical engineer because I love cars. And the idea, I don't know, this is kind of sexist, but the idea of working in a male-oriented role or field and being a female, I thought was something that was, for whatever reason, attractive to me. But then I realized I hated physics. I wasn't good at it. And, so I took a step back from the engineering field and and then was more interested in sort of the liberal arts field, and anthropology, for sure. I've always been interested in cultures and sociology and how people interact. That's just been a very natural interest of mine. And so it wasn't until college where I had this amazing professor called, his name is Dr. Pedro Pequeño, Cuban. And he sort of encouraged me to look at the law as an option. And so I did. I through his sort of mentorship, I decided that that's what I was going to pursue. Again, not really having something set in mind in terms of the law. I think one of the nice things about picking the legal profession at the onset is that you don't have to pick a specialization. I don't know how doctors are, whether or not they have to pick that at some point in medical school, but for lawyers, you graduate with a general law degree, and then it's up to you to hopefully find experience and placement and work in a specialized field. And so for me, I did know that I wanted to work, sort of my natural interest was working with Latin American issues and issues that dealt with more of international affairs. And so in law school, I wanted to work on this project that was documenting some of the experiences of Cuban Americans. But that opportunity had been filled by the law interns when I approached a professor, Terry Coonan, who I'll always be grateful to. At the Florida State University College of Law. And so when I asked him, told him about my interest, he, had an immigration case that he said that he needed help with, so that he, that I could volunteer to do that. So I did that, and I found it incredibly interesting and fulfilling. And so through that experience, he offered me an opportunity to work at an organization called FIAC, the Florida Immigrant Advocacy Center. It's now known as Americans for Immigrant Justice. And I did a summer internship there. And then sort of, my career path followed sort of those opportunities that were offered to me in law school, and that's how I, it's been step-by-step journey, but that's how I ended up at LatinoJustice, Pearl Def.
Yeah, that's great. That's great to hear that law school is such a fulfilling experience for you. And so what is your role now as a managing attorney at LatinoJustice Pearl Def in Florida?
Yeah, so just to sort of touch back too on something that supported my interest in immigration, which is immigration law specifically, was, I was a lawful permanent resident before becoming a U.S. citizen, and I was through my adulthood. I had sort of very strong feelings about the role of the colonizing countries, Spain, and Portugal. And so for the longest time, I wasn't even sure that I wanted to become a citizen, but going through that process and feeling very American and feeling very proud about my upbringing and my experience, but then at the same time, sort of seeing how immigrants were treated, even myself. I'll never forget when I was 14, I had a green card that didn't have my picture. And so I had to go with my dad to get my picture on the card. And I'll never forget, the process of being treated like a criminal. It was the weirdest thing because I was just a kid. And that experience sort of marked me, sort of like I understood that it was, that I was different, even though I really didn't feel different. So I'm sorry, I'm just like stressed out today.
No, feel free to take a minute. No worries. We can also move on to the next question if that's too personal. We completely understand, Kira. No worries.
Yeah, sure. But no, I can totally finish this thought.
Okay. Yeah, take your time.
So anyway, so when I was choosing what to do, I I decided that that was what I wanted to do because I wanted to influence change for immigrants.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Kira. I realized that was a very personal question. I really appreciate you sharing that with you. That's a very personal experience that I think, unfortunately, a lot of Latinos can relate to that. So thank you for sharing that. And so I wanted to ask you in terms of, now that influenced you working as a managing attorney, how would you say that, your experience that, you face discrimination or kind of this feeling of not being the same as everybody else? How does that help you, today in your role as a managing attorney at LatinoJustice Pearl Duff and the really important work that you all are doing?
So, I mean, it was kind of a blessing to find this opportunity here because, the more that I got involved in not only immigrants' rights work, but public interest work, that's the work that I really wanted to do. But unfortunately, the opportunities in Central Florida aren't flourishing. And you find more of that work, in the Northeast and on the West Coast, California, Texas, sort of the states that have more either progressive policies or have support to do this, and a lot more of the metro areas. And so for family reasons, my husband's job specifically, we weren't, able, or it wasn't just, it wasn't something that we were willing to do, family and life balance considerations. So anyway, so this job came available, and I was ready to sort of pivot, not necessarily out of immigration, but to do something different that was outside of direct services. Direct services, when you take cases for individuals and you represent them for specific issues. And this opportunity came, and I'll forever be grateful to LatinoJustice Pearl Duff for the opportunity, because it sort of married what I wanted to do with the next step that I wanted to have in my career, as well as being able to remain in Central Florida, where my family is and where, my husband's job is. And so, so the work is very fulfilling. It can be very complicated because we take impact cases, impact litigation. We follow a community lawyering model, which means that we work with organizers that identify issues that impact the community for us to either, act as a community lawyer, meaning that we counsel folks that are looking to organize change around their communities, or we file litigation. And typically, the way that I see it is that litigation is a tool that we use as sort of the last option, simply because litigation is protracted. It can be very expensive, and it sometimes doesn't give you the results in the most expedient way for the community. But it's definitely something that is very challenging because it takes so much time to really affect, long-lasting change. And so, and then specifically as it relates to civil rights, you sort of come to the understanding that systemic change is not something that can be won just via a lawsuit. And so it's incredibly fulfilling. It feels sort of mind-breaking at times, but it's the work that I feel very strongly about, both intellectually and on a personal level. So I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to be the managing attorney for LatinoJustice in the Southeast office.
Thank you. I'm so glad that we have people like you, representing Latino, someone who really understands, the experience. And so thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to ask you, I know you mentioned that you work with a lot of community organizers, that are inform you about some of the most critical issues that Latinos are facing right now. And so I wanted to ask how, if at all, COVID has impacted, these type of relationships that you have with these organizers, and how you've kind of pivoted to making it work despite, the COVID regulations, and just trying to make sure that everybody stays safety and healthy.
So it's impacted. It's been, I hate to use such a dramatic analogy, but the fact is that it's been almost like a bomb because it really has disconnected communities. Although, we have the luxury and the privilege of using telephone and Zoom to connect with each other, it's very hard to get out into the community, which is what we do. The first year that I started with LatinoJustice, I spent pretty much with organizers, going out, supporting events, talking to folks, and really trying to connect with the folks that do the organizing. And now, with the exception of one organization, ever since COVID hit in March, most of the organizers are not out in the field because they're not allowed to, obviously for their safety, which we support. And we know that COVID has had, far-reaching impact. Unfortunately, the devastation caused by families that are suffering losses or severe illness as a result of COVID, but also the loss of community, the feeling of isolation, and the economic loss is massive. So, and in a state like Florida, where it's primarily a service industry, it's has far-reaching implications, and so there's a lot of work that we haven't even touched on out there for us. So. In terms of how we've tried to connect, I think for me personally, our office is so small. It's myself and our legal services coordinator. So we don't have, a lot of resources. Unfortunately, because I've been tied up with litigation, I have been really disconnected with the organizers that I had, great relationships with. So now that, one of the major cases that I was working on is done, then I am very much looking forward to connecting with those folks and seeing how it is that we can continue to do field work in the safest way possible. And fortunately, I think that we have at our disposal some tools that we could use to do field work in a somewhat safe way. There's always a risk, but honestly, that's the only way I think we're going to reach our community and the folks that need the most help at this time.
And Kira, what kind of organizations did you work? Did you mostly work with prior to COVID, and has that changed now that we're in COVID? Have your kind of priorities on issues that Latinos are facing right now shifted to different organizations? Because I know some of the challenges a lot of Latinos are facing right now is, internet connection with children, having to do online school, and a lot of people unfortunately not having access to either electronics or a stable internet connection. So wanted to ask if, you still work with the same organizations, or if you've kind of shifted towards, other issues or organizations.
So we have worked with in terms of the organization we've worked with, that has remained the same. However, the need for direct services is great. And when I mean direct services is exactly what you mentioned, Latinos needing internet access, needing access to technology. So those areas are areas where we are always looking for communities that need the assistance, but then also to connect them with the organizations that assist in that sort of direct way. That is something that, in and of itself could be a full-time role in terms of what the legal services and nonprofit organizations do out there. And so our hope is that we will shore up sort of those connections so that when we go out to the communities, that we'll be able to refer folks so that they can get, meaningful assistance in those ways. But in terms of the work that we do, because we do impact litigation as it relates to voting rights, economic justice, immigrants' rights, and Puerto Rico, those are sort of the areas of focus that we undertake here at the Southeast office. Because of our limited resources, our focus right now is on voting, election protection, voting rights, democracy building principles. And we are fully engaged in terms of making sure that Latinos are educated as to why it matters so much that they vote, despite the very difficult circumstances that I think the majority of folks are facing. but that they also understand what their rights are under the law, under state and federal law, so that they are able to make an informed vote. So that's where our focus is, right now. And, for the time being, our relationships with organizations such as Organized Florida, Mi Familia Vota, Vamos for Puerto Rico, Poder Latinx, those are the relationships that sustain the work we do. And, as much as possible, we're engaging with those organizations because they're the ones that do the, get out the vote, voter registration activities that we don't do, because we focus on voter education and impact litigation to the extent possible, as well as we are doing census work. So we have engaged with, obviously COVID hit and changed the model of what we were intending to do. So we're engaging with school officials so that we could, pass materials out to the hard to count communities in Orange, Osceola, Polk counties, so that we make sure that those folks understand the importance of the census. And that also leads us into redistricting work, which is work that we have always traditionally done at LatinoJustice and becomes ever more important in light of everything else that's happening in our communities.
You actually talked on a very important point that I think is, very crucial, especially right now during COVID, which was, getting Latinos to still vote, even if it's, vote by mail, and really informing them of what it is that, they have to do. And so I wanted to ask that, despite the growing number of Latinos into the electorate, as we're aging into the electorate and we're becoming more involved in politics, some of the obstacles we still face are getting to the ballot box. And specifically, I wanted to ask you if you can talk about the recent voting rights lawsuit that you were involved in against Florida to try and increase the vote by mail procedures.
Yes, sure. So we filed that lawsuit, if I'm not mistaken, on March 16th, and it was definitely on the eve of the presidential primary in March in Florida. And we filed that lawsuit on behalf of voters who have disabilities, language access issues, and young voters, because the state of Florida really made no changes in light of the COVID pandemic that was, impacting the community at that same very moment. And so, unfortunately, our temporary restraining orders, we filed requests for 2, were denied. However, the lawsuit, continued on as it related to the remaining elections in 2020. And so what we basically were arguing for extended early voting periods, an extended cure period. There were other things that we were also championing through our litigation. However, I would say those were the ones that, we understood would face the uphill battles simply because of the way these emergency litigation issues are handled and seen and treated by the courts. And so ultimately we came to a settlement agreement with the Secretary of State, which we're actually actively working on, that we thought would be most beneficial for all of the parties, as we not only sued the Secretary of State of Florida, as well as all of the 67 supervisor of elections and the canvassing board of the entire state, as well as the canvassing boards of those counties. And so because of the nature of the litigation, we thought it would be best to focus on what we could do proactively to work with the supervisors to get the best outcome for the voters. And I would say one of the best outcomes that we did receive was on behalf of the disabled voters. They did certify a voting system that would allow voters to vote by mail from home, which is, super important in light of COVID. So that was a huge win for our communities. And although it won't be implemented in all counties for this November election, it is something that is going to be achieved in the near future. And so we're excited and in support of making sure that all voters have access to the ballot, but they're able to cast, an informed ballot and understand in a meaningful way how important it is for them to exercise their right to vote.
And in your opinion, Kira, what are elected officials in Florida doing right now to make sure that, Latinos and really everyone has access to the ballot box as we go into the general election, and make sure that they're, informed on how to vote by mail? Because I know a lot of people aren't very familiar with it. And so I wanted to ask, in your opinion, what do you think is being done by elected officials in Florida?
Well, I can speak specifically on the Secretary of State, and I know that she is doing her best to try to reach out to all communities, and in particular, based on the mandate under the Voting Rights Act, Section 203, which requires the state of Florida is covered under Section 203 in its entirety for Spanish language. So I know that she is making a concerted effort to reach all voters, and then specifically folks who are newly eligible to vote, meaning naturalized citizens or new voters, folks that have either moved into the state or young folks that are finally at the age where they can vote. So I know that she has personally made it, her mandate to try to reach as many voters as possible. And as a result as well of our litigation. But I also know that there are some supervisors that are trying their best to make sure that voters understand that there's another option, to cast their ballot. The three ways. It's you can vote in person, you can vote early, or you can vote by mail. And you're exactly right. Latinos, there are some Latinos that do distrust the voting system. It could be because of other experiences or what they've heard, other experiences meaning in other countries or what they've heard. And so I think that, one of the opportunities that we have is really to educate our community to the fact that, if they request a vote by mail ballot, they can, submit it in person to the supervisors during early voting at the locations where they have ballot boxes. And so that's super important, because I can tell you, even myself, the COVID is a new reality for us. It just changes the way we live and what the priorities are. And, in a minute, it could be that all of a sudden you have a family member who may be sick or or something's locked down because of suspected, illness issues and things like that. And so despite the fact that most of us aren't traveling, it's still things are different. And so we're trying to make sure that Latinos understand that they have that opportunity to request a vote by mail ballot and deliver it in person if their concern is that they distrust the Postal Service, for example, or that they want to make sure that their ballot gets to the place where it needs to be and that they see it and they witness it. And that is a valid concern. But that they also understand that they're, that they can vote early if they still want to vote in person, or they can, go on election day, which is the option that I would least, support during this time. I mean, I think people should do that if they can, but, just knowing what the circumstances are, I think, you should try to get it in as soon as possible.
And Kira, what type of any narratives have been shared with you about, Latinos? I know you mentioned Latinos distrusting, voting from either things they've heard or just personal experiences. And so I wanted to ask if there's been any narratives that have been shared with you from people, residents of Florida, talking to you about either, not being able to vote or feeling unsafe or what have you.
So many stories. I mean, we do election protection. We have so many stories that we could share related to this. And, some of the things that I get on my soapbox, and I feel like a broken record saying, but the reality is that when you're talking about voting rights, that's a job that's 365 days a year. It's not just during election time. And the reason for that is that the laws change. The state legislatures can change the process of how this is done, of how elections are administered, and how poll monitors can work. For example, in the state of Florida, we had a change that we who work a nonpartisan way to have poll monitors out at polling sites to make sure that voters are able to vote. We are now have to stand 150 feet from the entrance of a polling location, which is substantial considering the makeup of some polling locations where you either have parking lot or structures that obstruct the view. So it can be very challenging and difficult at times to be able, to do this. But I can share that Latinos have, issues related to language, where we've had voters who tell us, I moved from Orange County to Lake County, and when I tried to register to vote, I couldn't speak English, and they said they couldn't help me, and they turned them away. We have Latinos who say they've, been forced to cast a blank ballot by a poll worker. We have Latinos who say that they were threatened, and indeed the police were called on them because they were wearing T-shirts that in Spanish had an organization that they were a member of, and had to explain to the police that they were well within their rights to do that and to be able to vote at the same time. We have, all sort of different scenarios that we have encountered through our work. In terms of Latinos believing or feeling that they're, not able to cast their ballots. We have Latinos who have entered the polling place because they don't have a Spanish language ballot, who take over an hour, not because there's a long line or because there's any holdup, but because they can't understand English and they can't, figure it out. And so we had another lawsuit that we filed in 2018 on behalf of Puerto Rican voters who were educated on the island. And as a result of that litigation, we won a huge victory, which now a rule in Florida provides that all ballots be provided in Spanish throughout the state. And so our mission, this year is to make sure that Latinos understand that they have this option. And so, it's easier. It's harder than it seems to try to reach our communities throughout the state. And that's where we're at. That's a juncture where we're at, to make sure that we inform as many voters as possible that this is their right, and that they should ask for this if they need it.
Thank you for sharing that, Kira. I wanted to ask if you see these kind of issues playing out in the north side of Florida, versus the south side. I'm not from Florida, but, I wanted to ask if you see kind of differences between the two, or if, one side faces different issues that the other one doesn't.
I think it's interesting that you asked that question, because one of the things that when we, my goal would be to cover the entire state in terms of election protection, but we have 67 counties, and that's not always possible. We are making out a call for volunteers, currently, but, one of the questions I was asked during the 2018 election cycle was, where do you want to position our volunteers? And so at the time I said, we need folks in the rural areas where we don't have, we have population, but we don't have a lot of community organizers, or we have no community organizers. We have no Spanish language media. And that actually turned out to be effective in a way, because it helped us with the litigation that we had pending at the time. However, we still did receive notices that there were issues even in places like Osceola County, where you have a majority, Latino population, where there were some polling places that had no excuse for not having poll workers in Spanish, but did. We have reports of that. So you really, unfortunately, there are success stories, undoubtedly, and there are places where things run very smoothly. And I can say that I've been privileged to experience that as well. But, as someone who works in this field, your goal is to make sure that every Latino and all voters are able to cast a ballot if they're eligible. And that really takes a large operation to make sure that, that is done. And so that's our goal. In terms of differences, yes, we do see differences, in counties where either a poll worker who doesn't understand, or maybe hasn't, didn't fully engage in the training. You can see that there are times where they turn away folks that are asking for assistance because they either don't know or don't want to help. And so we have seen that from, counties in the north and the Panhandle on the West Coast. And so, again, it's not isolated to those areas, because it can happen even in Orange County. But, we do see that is an issue, and that is why we are trying as our best to make sure that we have as many poll monitors out on the field to help with the situation, because it's not like when a change happens, it's not something that happens overnight for the community. It's something that you have to continuously work on, because otherwise things aren't really going to change.
What would you tell people or organizations or even, the political parties right now, what would you tell them to encourage, voter turnout and just to get people to go out and vote this upcoming election? As, everybody's saying it is going to be a historical election. So what would you tell either individuals or organizations like LatinoJustice to really focus on right now, as we're only a few, I believe it's 85 days or something like that from the general election?
Yeah, I counted either Wednesday, I think it's at 60 something right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we're getting very close. So what I would tell elected officials is to reach their constituents, to talk to them, to basically encourage education. I think that's the number one message that I would send out, because for folks that are new to the state or are naturalized or are new voters, the voting process can be complicated. If you don't have a Florida driver license or a Florida ID, you may have to go through an additional step to register online. And so there are all these different things that can present obstacles. So I would say educate yourself, try to vote early, register as soon as you can if you're eligible, and then, contact organizations like LatinoJustice, like Hispanic Federation, and ask questions if you have problems. Don't let obstacles stand in your way. If you're a citizen and you have the right to vote, you should exercise it. And the other thing I will say is that, I think there is some apathy, folks, and I won't say everyone, but a lot of folks feel pretty negative about the state of affairs. But I will, underscore that the only way to really, really effectuate change is to make yourself heard. And that requires voting, and that requires being out there and continuing the dialogue on the different changes that we would like to see on behalf of our community. So I would say that this is a way for you to do that and encourage people to find out. It may seem daunting, but it doesn't have to be. And there are plenty of organizations out there, including LatinoJustice, to help in any way, so that folks have can exercise their right.
Thank you for sharing that, Kira. Do you think that the Latino electorate is growing, not just in terms of numbers, but in political power, specifically within the Puerto Rican community, as their numbers have been increasing in Florida?
I think there's a great deal of support and interest in the Puerto Rican community, in that it is. I think the number that in the state of Florida alone has surpassed 1 million, although, we don't have the hard data yet, but I would venture to guess that it, is likely at that number or even beyond. I think that this is an important opportunity for folks from Puerto Rico to really make themselves heard. I think the circumstances for Puerto Ricans are more unique even to that of the non-Puerto Rican voter, in that the folks who have come from the island have a very different lived experience, and they may even feel even more negative about their opportunity to really influence change. But I think that for Puerto Ricans who care about the island, for Puerto Ricans who care about their community and making a life here, and really having their culture as much as possible supported in all ways, I think that this is a real opportunity for them to exercise their right to vote and really show their political power. Having said that, Puerto Ricans are not, they should not, they are just as diverse as the Latino population. They vote in ways, just in line with the Latino population. So I wouldn't say that you could pigeonhole them, that you could say, they're all Republicans or they're all Democrats. That really isn't something that I've experienced. However, I do think that they're a force to be reckoned with, and I hope that the community will come together and really show that force, because I think that there's undoubtedly they have and they will continue to lead on changes on behalf of the Puerto Rican community and Latinos, more broadly. So I'm encouraged by what I see, and I'm encouraged by the fact that there are many more folks from Puerto Rico that are interested in running for office, and that they're being supported in that way. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the opportunity to have our representation, as an option. And I hope that we can continue to support that in all ways. And because that's, an important point to make, in that one of the things that we also see when we do election protection, meaning poll monitoring, is that we see who's coming out, right? And we see sort of the population statistics, right? How much of the population in that particular precinct is, white, African-American, Latino, and Puerto Rican. And, what we see is that I think a lot of that show up, it requires interest in the candidates, for better or for worse. I think, until we reach the point where our voters understand that there are serious issues that need to be determined on the ballot, as well as candidates, as folks running for office, that, folks are going to turn up for candidates. And until we see more of the representation, I think we'll struggle with showing our numbers in that way. And that's what I hope, that Latinos will show up in force, and that we will have more representatives that come from our community.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Kira. I wanted to shift gears a little bit to talking about detainment and policing issues, because I know that prior to joining LatinoJustice, you were the program director for the Children's Legal Program at Americans for Immigrant Justice. And so I wanted to ask you if you've, with the recent Abolish ICE, or, even the Black Lives Matter movement, if you've collaborated with any of these organizations, focusing on immigration and detainment issues in Florida.
So yes, we were part of a group that was looking at ICE detainers and enforcement. We are very supportive of the work that is being done by some of our partners that are, on the ground, in particular FLIC and organizations that work on behalf of immigrant communities. We have been looking at these issues very deeply, also making referrals when we are unable to sort of lead on these topics. But in terms of Black Lives Matter, we are very much in support of the movement. We're in support of our brothers and sisters leading the movement, because there is no question that this is something that has to change in this country, and there's no question that the movement is exactly what we need to do in order to change the dial on what's happening. I think that as Latinos, we have to understand that our history is inextricably intertwined with that of the experiences of our African American brothers and sisters in this country, and in different ways, obviously. But they are the ones that have made this country the democracy that we live in now, and it's a struggle. It's not something that has changed or will change overnight. And so we are in solidarity with the movement, and in ways that have been limited because of COVID, we're very much in support of the movement.
Thank you. That's really great to hear. And it is a really important movement, especially with, the uprisings and the police brutality that's just really has always been an issue, but, now more than ever. And so I wanted to ask you how you think, if at all, that the BLM, defunding the police and abolishing ICE will impact the mobilization of Latinx communities in Florida and really in any other state for the upcoming general election this upcoming November.
So I think that, I look to the young people. I will be honest on this issue. I mean, we support abolishing ICE. We support defunding the police and putting the monies towards mental health and other systems of care to treat the actual issue, right? Not to put people in cages. But I think that this movement, you know, we're living an incredible moment of time in our history, but I am very much in support of the young people who are leading on this movement and really making it so that folks understand that this is another struggle in our step towards achieving equality for all. And, you know, I do think that the only way that folks are going to listen to the message, and in particular, the message around immigration and immigrants' rights and reform, is that we have to show up at the ballot box. We must show up. It is our sacred duty to do that now. And for Latinos in particular, we're fragmented. We represent, in terms of the spectrum of skin color, everything under the rainbow. In terms of political opinion, everything under the rainbow. But it is, you know, I think unparalleled what Latinos have been subjected to in the last, you know, since this administration, you know, took office. And I think there were things that were always there, that have always been there. Latinos experiencing discrimination, but not talking about it. Because at the same time, you know, I think one of the issues that we face is that for a lot of us who have the privilege to pass, or who, you know, because of lack of accent or because of opportunity, you know, a lot of times we forget that may not have even been our lived experience, like going through the process, and that they're folks that we're leaving behind, and that there are things we won't talk about, and in particular as it relates to criminal justice. So I think the way that we make the changes is to continue to the movement, and in particular the injustice suffered by immigrants, right? And the unlawful, and the folks that are deemed to be unlawfully here in this country, how they're used to further the economic engine of this country, and how drug policy continues to further the injustices that we see at the border and in this country. And until we highlight that, and until we use that as the fuel to make the changes, we will continue to be subjected to you know, things like DACA that don't really move us anywhere. You know, I am in support of having legalization on behalf of all the young folks who are here, but not at the expense of leaving their parents behind. And so they continue to use these methods to divide us. And I think that it comes time where it is on us. And I don't see that something as being championed as much by the Latino community, but it is on us to move the dial, because if we don't expose the atrocities that are being lived by the immigrant community that are here, you know, that touch every single aspect of American life, then we're going to continue to be beholden to these changes that are superficial and that don't really provide equality to these members of our community.
What would you like for people to understand, or about either, you know, what they can do or just inform others, whether it be in regards to systemic racism or voter suppression in today's political climate, and as we go into the next election?
That they have a voice, that they need to support immigration reform, that it's not just a Latino issue, that white Americans, Black Americans should support immigration reform, because that is the system that is keeping folks in a way that they're subjected to levels of servitude that people don't really even understand unless they go out to the community. In terms of discrimination and racism, that is something that we all carry. Myself, every single American carries, because I'm a product of this community. That I can't say that it hasn't influenced me. Yes, of course it has. And that we have to be honest with ourselves about what our lived experiences are and how we are making changes by talking to our children, by making choices that support our community members and that continue to support, minority businesses. And that educate our children about the real history of the United States, not what's force-fed to us, in school. And that until we take that hard, cold look at ourselves and realize and recognize and accept the challenge of making these changes to fully become a democracy and representative of our gente, of our community, that we haven't achieved it and we won't. So that is what I would say is that we have to take, it's not something that, because I'm a white American, I could say, well, I've never done that. That's not true. We all have our part in this. And for Latinos, and specifically, I would say that it touches us in a different way. And to me, it makes the responsibility greater. And I would say that they should find out about the organizations that are doing the work and to either volunteer or support, that it can't be something passive, because if it continues to be this way, we're going to continue to see, George Floyd's, we're going to continue to see folks shot, when they're walking away from a police officer. We're going to continue to see things that should make you, howl with sorrow over the injustice, but we can't continue to pretend like it's not touching us, because it's happening in our community as well. And that shouldn't even matter. We are all Americans. And even the folks that we call unlawful, those are the folks that are the backbone of a lot of the systems in this country. And we should, if we don't participate, they're going to continue to be used as pawns, and seen as less than human. And that is not a principle that I think as Americans we should ascribe to, or as humans.
Thank you so much for that, Kira. Thank you for highlighting that, this moment in time doesn't just affect one person, one group of people, but really everybody. Thank you. And so to conclude this interview, I want to ask you what you're proud of as a Latina, as a resident of Florida, in this moment in time.
I'm proud of my community. In coming back to Central Florida from Miami, I was heartbroken. I love Miami. Miami reminds me of a tropical New York City, and in mass, even more sort of proudly Latin American and Caribbean. So it was, and they have, I was able to tap into a very vibrant, progressive movement in South Florida of all folks from all different walks of life. And so coming back to Central Florida, I was demotivated, to be quite honest, but I found similarly an amazing community here in Central Florida, an amazing activist community that really cares about their neighbor, that really cares about the well-being of everyone, and of championing the bright and hard work that we do in making sure that there is equality for all. And so I feel very proud of that. I feel proud of my parents, of their struggle, coming from a totally foreign country and learning the language as best they could and supporting us, and sort of living that American dream. It was not perfect. There were tremendous losses for us along the way, but at the same time, I am a product of that sort of quote unquote dream that people talk about all the time. It isn't without struggle and it isn't without pain, but it can be done. And that is one of the things, many times I find, I realize, well, what they told me in school wasn't true. But the one thing that I have lived that is true in this country still, and I hope will always remain, is that if you focus on education, you can really make a career for yourself. You can make a life for yourself. That may not be the same in other countries, that may not be an opportunity that could be extended to you in another place. And so that I will always be proud of. And for those reasons, I am, as difficult as it feels sometimes to say, I am very proud to be a citizen of this country, but I understand that it's becoming harder and harder to have that lived experience. And so I'm, I try my best to be up for the challenge as much as possible, because I want my kids and every child to have that same opportunity. It's not easy in this country, but I think it's still there, and I think it's still attainable. And so I'm hopeful for those reasons.
And what is the Florida that you want to see in 10 years from now? Or even, what do you envision the future of Florida even beyond that?
Florida is a beautiful state with amazing people. Florida, unfortunately, is the butt of many jokes. And, I will say, though, that having lived here now for the majority of my life, that, there is an opportunity for Florida to become more representative of her community. I think that's going to take a lot of struggle. I think, the economic interests that control the state are powerful. But without the folks that are here, the good people that do the work to realize those expectations and goals of these corporations and businesses, where would we be? At the same time, I think one of the big issues that Floridians and unfortunately everyone faces are these issues related to the environment. And so, I hope that we are able to fight for a more equitable future for workers and to protect the environment because, Florida has a lot to lose. And so I also think that in terms of education, we have to really look at, what is being done to the educational system in the state, both at the very micro granular level in terms of where these new schools are being built and how, this focus on standardized testing and performance are really affecting our students and their ability to learn the skills that they need to contribute to society in meaningful ways. And so my hope for Florida in 10 years is that we become more representative and that more folks engage in making sure that we hold Florida for what she is, and that we bring a sort of beautiful reality to the state and to her residents and citizens. I mean, to all the people who live here, because we have a tremendous amount to lose. And I think that the only way that we will realize that is by making the state more representative of what her community is. And if you walk into the state capitol, you will find that it isn't. And even the folks that are there representing, that are Latinos, don't necessarily have the power to make the changes on behalf of their community. So I'm hoping that does change, and we're working towards that as well in my role as a citizen of Florida who is able to vote, but as well as in my role at LatinoJustice to support sort of changes that will impact our community in a positive way.
Thank you, Kira. Is there anything else you would like to add or to let people know that I didn't ask you or we didn't touch on during this interview?
That, racism and discrimination is prevalent everywhere in this country, that it's not just a Southern issue, that it's something that is experienced very much in the Northeast, but it's under the guise of economic class, I would say, as compared to the South, that it's hidden better than it is in the South, and that as Latinos, we shouldn't hide these experiences that we have, and that we should instead engage and see how we can make changes, because the more we pretend that it doesn't exist, I think the more entrenched it becomes, and the more we see ourselves as us and them as other. And I think there's a real sense of urgency in this moment to really recognize and reckon with what our history has been in this country, and even, from where we came from. And so my hope is that Latinos take this as their mission to ensure not only for their well-being and for their families, but for the next generations, and for those folks who are newly arriving or who are here, undocumented, that their actions can really have impact for the protection of those folks, and for them to be able to reach a point where they will be seen as equals because they are.
Okay, well, Kira, I want to thank you so much on behalf of LPPI and LDAP. It was truly an honor and a pleasure to talk to you today, to interview you, and to get to hear your oral history. Thank you for being so honest and just very, very open during this interview. And so I wanted to let you know that, your time, your work is so appreciated, especially during, the time that we're living in. And it's going to be an essential part of this project. And so I want to, million thank yous. I hope that all is well. I know you were telling me about, the work emergency that you had. So I hope everything gets better, and I hope everything works out. Always here if you need anything too. And we will be reaching out to you, and we'll send over this interview to share with you shortly after. And so I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and Adolfo today.
Thank you both so much. And again, apologies, but it was just a stressful day, but it's all administrative stuff, and everything is going to be fine. But thank you both so much for the interest and for the incredible work that you're doing. I think it's very meaningful and helpful. And, it's wonderful that you all are doing this, because I think as a Latina, I can also share that it's hard. Our indigenous background is sort of a big mystery oftentimes. And so anything that captures what the reality of the moments are, I think is worthwhile. So thank you for this project. Really appreciate you both, and have a wonderful weekend. Take good care.